So for me, a good hiring process across the board, regardless of who I'm working with, comes down to three things: clarity, transparency, and efficiency. So clarity, by that I mean, clear JDs. What are we looking for? What are the must-haves? What are the nice-to-haves? Infrastructure, interview structure. Who's making the decisions? Who's owning what? The second one I mentioned was transparency, both internal and external. So internally, everybody from the junior most HR person to the senior most leadership team member needs to be on the same page on what the role is, what the budget is, what the process is, who's making decisions. And often they're not. Externally, transparency comes in the way of clear processes, timelines, compensation. And there is often a unfair power dynamic in hiring between the hirer and the candidate. And when this transparency and when information is withheld, that's where a lot of the confusion comes in. That's where a lot of time gets wasted. And the third one is efficiency. And I should mention efficiency is not speed. So efficiency, I mean, the right number of interview stages, no duplication of effort, no unnecessary decision makers or processes, timely feedback, things like that. So not speed. Speed is rushing. What I'm referring to is sort of thoughtful efficiency. And all of these kind of work together.
As I was pondering about this, I actually went back like 10 odd years ago when I was applying to all my master's programs in the US. And I particularly remember Stanford's application, where their question slash thesis for the application was that your past is the best predictor of your future. So show us your past credentials and then we'll see if you're a good fit or not for Stanford. And I think that is a very faulty assumption because you're not factoring in how much somebody's past is predicated on the access to opportunities that they have or have not had. And you're not necessarily solving for somebody's inherent capability or potential. So, what we did was we did a very simple resume study. We put out two resumes, one of Priyanka Sharma and one of Habiba Ali, and applied to 1,000 entry level positions in India. And we saw that Priyanka Sharma, the Hindu sounding name, received two times the job callbacks that Habiba Ali, the Muslim sounding name, received. And there were many other very interesting layering that was happening over here. We also, in the first 500 applications for Habiba Ali, we gave her a college and an NGO that sounded very Muslimi. So, like Jamia being undergrad or Zakat Foundation being the NGO that she served at. But even when we flipped the profile, and Priyanka Sharma was the one who studied from a more Muslimi sounding university or internet, such an NGO, the disparity of job callbacks continued to be the exact same. So, really, the only variable that seemed to be accounting for this difference was their name. And even within that, what we noticed was that Priyanka would get more phone calls telling her that she's made it through. So 40% of the information for a particular job that was given to Priyanka was through a call, whereas that number dwindled down to 18%. So of all the jobs that Habiba was getting, only 18% of them were phone call information or phone calls to her. Another layer over here was so Priyanka roughly got 200 calls out of the 1,000 jobs, and Habiba got 100. But 88 of the 100 that Habiba got were common between Priyanka and Habiba. And they were often played out with Priyanka getting the phone call first. And when Priyanka would say no, Habiba would get called. So there's just so much to unpack over here with this research that we've done. Now, the question is, this research really points out to the problem and what could solutioning possibly look like. And a hiring process that I think is 3 points. Accessible, first of all, to folks is really, really crucial, that there's no gatekeeping. The second is, what are you looking for in the hiring process? This goes back to my Stanford story, which is, are you looking at a mix of skill and will? And for the social sector, and I'd love for like Divya to validate, or did she not validate, is I think integrity becomes incredibly important as well to test for mission-driven organizations. Again, the space that I work in, so skill, will, and integrity. And the third, which is something we try to live through, led by values, as well as we are hiring, as we are selecting our 400 applicants who go on to become graduates of our foundation, is that application or the hiring process should be a learning point also for the applicant. Like there needs to be respect for the time being put in by the applicant. And yes, sure, a rejection email is like at the absolute bare minimum to close the loop, but we strive to actually provide feedback if there is meaningful feedback to be provided, or at least a rationale for why we did not go with their profile, so they at least know, is it something they could work on, or was it just out of their hands?
But it's funny, AI slop is a little bit of a misnomer because the problem for us is the quality is too good rather than the quality is too bad. So the dirty secret of a lot of hiring processes is that it's mostly a process of deselection. So we might have 500 candidates and 1 or 2 positions. So we need a process that will effectively filter out 98% of candidates. And our old system worked reasonably well. It wasn't perfect, but it did reliably hire people who then went on to perform quite well at their jobs on average. Of course, you still have a probation process. You can never be certain in advance that a person's going to do very well in the role until they're actually doing the role. But we had a pretty good hit rate. So that very first problem is the increase in volume. There's just many more applications than before because the cost of generating the applications is so low with the help of GPT. The second is the slop challenge for us is that if we're grading scores from 1 to 5 star, 5 is the best. It used to be a lot of them you would grade 1 or 2 star, and now that's very rare. Everyone gets at least a 3, maybe a 4. And it's frustrating because you know sometimes that they're using AI. You can't be sure though. And it feels harsh to penalize somebody who might have a very structured way of responding, the way a lot of AI responses tend to be quite structured. Sometimes they make it easy for us because they include in their response, yes, I'd be happy to help you with this response for the behavioral insights team. They forget to omit that when they get their AI generated answer. So in those cases, it's a quick 1 star and we move on. But if we started with 500 and we might quickly get to 50 in the old model, now we're starting with 500 and maybe we get to 250. And it's like, okay, and another laborious process is now needed to try and filter that down a little bit more. So we're calling it AI slop, but for us, it's actually this problem of a CEO of mediocrity that's making it more difficult to quickly find the gems.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's quite interesting, like how the problem is not like really about bad quality, but like an excess of like very polished, good sounding applications.
What I don't think we solved is what do you do instead of that? The one thing I'm not hearing about that kind of worries me is most of the conversations are about the volume of poor quality applications that are looking good. What we're not talking about enough is the good applications that get rejected because they're not optimized for these systems. And I actually, when I think about it, I can't think of many conversations I've had around this. People are frustrated with the amount of work, but what they're not realizing is a good candidate a very strong candidate who might just not have optimized their resume or their answer to work with your system, you actually might be losing that candidate. And so, that's another big risk that I don't think we're talking about enough, but something that I think we should start thinking about.
We did an experiment where we used AI to help us grade responses. So we can't really do anything to stop this increased volume that we're getting when 500 people apply and it used to be 50. Okay, that's going to be continuing for the foreseeable future. We ran a live hiring process and in parallel, we did an experiment with AI. So it was just a sandbox experiment. The humans still decided who would progress in the system. We just wanted to run the AI experiment in parallel and compare its judgment. So we found, quite predictably, it was 98% faster than the humans who were doing the grading when they're doing the 1 to 5 grading of candidate responses. 98% faster, but we know that's what AI is very, very good at. It can do in seconds or minutes what takes our human experts hours and hours. And its judgment was even reasonably well correlated with the humans, maybe 0.8. Pretty good. But when you look into it in more detail, we found some problems. So one is a kind of positivity bias, which, I mean, I think if I would use a were to describe the personality of ChatGPT, for example, I would say it's very affirmatory. It's very, very keen. It has a strong positivity bias in the sense of whatever you suggest to it, it's very happy to build on that. So it has this strong tendency towards affirmation and supporting the direction of travel. So if a human would give this candidate a 3, GPT would give it a 4 or a 5. And the rankings would be kind of similar of who the AI thought was the best and the worst candidate, but the AIs were giving more positive scores. But the much bigger problem was that AI, it turns out, loves the sound of its own voice. So we found something very strange in our experiment results, which is that there was one candidate the AI really loved, and the humans ranked them number 63. So that person would never get close to an interview. And it turns out it wasn't a person. When we looked into it, it was the most robotic AI answer you've ever seen. And the AI itself, the AI grading it, loved it. 5 stars. Which makes sense, right? The AI on the other side, the candidate has instructed the AI to generate a response, and then an AI grades that response, and sure enough, it loves it. So that's been that kind of bottleneck. I mean, we've done other experiments I'm happy to talk about later since then to try and use the AI in a more sensible way, but that's been a bottleneck to its immediate use in terms of trying to reap those efficiency gains.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting finding in itself.
Cover letters are exceptionally hard. I think I just get so turned off by very polished cover letters. I'm like, give me a mistake with you. Like even for example, on this, even in preparation for this particular call, I was just like, I noticed like one error in an email, and I was like, yes, it is written by a human, and it made me more engaged with the email. So I feel that way with cover letters, but there is one part. So to move that cover letter from a traditional signal to a more authentic signal source, one is yes, this costly time investment of getting yourself a badge like Led By or some other courses. And I am sensing / encouraging our students to exhibit their will through more authentic signaling, which includes offering your time to volunteer or intern for roles that you're super passionate about.
So one joke I have about this is that maybe hiring is going to turn into what it looked like 100 years ago. You're going to meet somebody and shake their hand and test the strength of their grip and say, what did your father do for a living? And did you play rugby in school? It's going to collapse to some simpler, reduced version of characteristics that maybe were valued in the past and might become valued again as AI starts to automate more and more other conventional skills.
I'm saying that at this point of where we are in the kind of tools that we have. So to use AI to improve efficiency, but keep humans responsible for judgments and decisions. And I say this with a huge caveat that human judgment is not perfect. It's far from it. And I think, Ruha also brought up a point on, if bias creeps in, which one is more dangerous, right? So I am saying this just keeping in mind the restrictions and the kind of tools that we have now or that are being used most widely. So the way I would think about it is your system or your AI tool should maybe focus on eliminating the clear no's, but not deciding the yeses. So AI can be really useful, and I don't even know if it's as complicated as AI, but your system can be really useful at clearing the deal breakers. Anybody who's missing the must-haves is not eligible, but should not be deciding who actually gets through, and certainly should not be deciding the maybes, right? The gray area that I think I talked about a little bit earlier. The candidates who are promising but aren't perfect on paper, aren't optimized for your system, those candidates need human review. And often those are the strongest candidates.